A view policy is something that is going to be used by one or more views. And basically, a view policy goes through and we use what's referred to as a security flavor to describe the personality related features of the view. So if I want to have a view that is traditional NFS, meaning we want to just have permission controls be owner, group, everyone, or owner, group, other, read, write, execute, for each one of those, we can go through and do that. We set the security flavor to be NFS. If I want to have more granular permissions, such as I want to have inheritance rules and rich ACLs and things like that for SMB, I would select an SMB flavor. If I want to make use of identity policies and user policies and these various different identity policies and bucket policies and things like that, I can go through and use the S3 native security flavor to go through and do that. Ultimately, with these different flavors, they just again describe the personality of that. They do control a little bit. They have some effect on the protocols, but really it's around where we want to set our permissions. And I'll talk about that a little bit more once we get into some of the multi-protocol stuff. It also goes through and we would set other things on there, such as access control rules, meaning which clients do I want to have access, which VIP pools do I want to have data presented out, or views that are using this policy presented out on, and other things such as auditing. So if I want to audit a whole bunch of shares together or a whole bunch of views together, I would set that in the view policy, and then all those views would use those same things. So we get a couple things. So if you think about it, is that a view policy is going to cover more than one view, one or more views. So with a view policy, we've got a couple different things here that we talk about. We talk about what tenant is it part of, because we can have different view policies for different tenants, or multiple view policies for the same tenant. We give it a name. Again, we define our security flavor, and we'll talk more in detail with those in a bit. And we control how we want to have things exported. Normally, if I leave things blank, we're going to present data out across all of the VIP pools that are configured on the system or configured within the cluster. But if I want to control where I want data presented out, I could select one VIP pool or multiple VIP pools individually. Maybe I've got a segmented network where I only want to have some views on an internal network and other views on an external network, or different network topologies. We can control things like that. But if I leave things blank for the virtual IP pools here, it's going to present it out across everything. And then we have our host-based access rules. So if you're familiar with NFS, NFS has the rules surrounding which clients are read-only, which clients are allowed read-only access, which clients are allowed read-write access. How do we handle the root user through squash rules? Do I want to treat the root user or UID0 as UID0 and allow them full rights to change and reset permissions, or do I not want to allow those? And then we also have the same thing for just a very coarse based on client source IP address, controlling read-write access over SMB or over S3. The last two here for SMB and S3, not a very common thing to do, but there are reasons to go through and do that if you feel so for. We can also go through, I mentioned this here, we can also go through and do some things in the view policy to control some other features. Specifically, how do we handle group membership? So if you're familiar with NFS, there's a 16 group limit with the NFS RPC call. This is defined by the NFS RFC, saying you only have the owner of the file, or the user making the IO, their primary group, and then up to 16 groups. We can control that here to say where we're getting that information from. Do we want to rely on what's in the RPC, or do we want to leverage things like our Active Directory providers or Open LDAP providers to get all those additional groups? And then there's other options here controlling things like security. Do we want to enforce encryption over TLS? Do I want to enforce Kerberos encryption? We can do things like that through the view policy. And then we can do some other things. So things like if we want to handle, how do we want to handle the default POSIX mode bits for protocols that don't use POSIX mode bits? So this would be a situation like if we're talking SMB, when you create a file, it goes through and it wants to inherit permissions from the parent directory via inheritable ACLs. Well, if you're using an NFS flavor, which is your traditional Unix, for that. There aren't any inheritable ACLs. So this basically says for those types of operations, be it from SMB or S3, that we can set permissions a certain way for those protocols that otherwise wouldn't have permissions initially set on them. Then we have other controls in here as to how we control things like, characters. Do we want to allow certain character sequences for things like S3 that might be invalid on other protocols and some other S3 related settings? We can set up the default auditing for this. There is auditing that can be set up on the platform itself for a cluster-wide default auditing, but we can add additional auditing on certain files or certain views if we want to, surrounding all of those. So including the operations to audit, the protocols we want to audit, we would set those in the view policy. And then some other things in here, specifically around how do we handle different character sets, because NFS and SMB have different characters that are allowed and not allowed, and S3 has different characters that are allowed. So we can go through and say, do I want to enforce a limit to those characters and those path links, things like that, so that we are going to guarantee that all the data that I write over one protocol is going to be accessible and referenceable over other ones, or do I want to allow certain files or certain directories to be written or created that may have names that don't make sense in another protocol. So we can set some controls around those. So really, if I want to go through and I want to create a new view or create a new view policy, it's relatively simple. We go through and in the VMS GUI, you'll go through, you'll navigate to the element store. You'll go down, you'll click on the element store here. You'll click on views, and then this button says create new. And you just go through and populate the data that you want and say create, and a system goes out and creates those there, and it's immediately available for mounting on a client or immediately available over SMB or S3 or however you wish to go through and do it. Very, very simple, very easy to go through and do.